All right. Well, thank you all for sharing where you're tuning in from. This is awesome. I don't even need to say anything about that. Um, I am tuning in from the land of the Shasta and Minimem Wintu people. I'm very excited to be here with Metztli this morning. I just want to give a little, do a little housekeeping with you all, which some of you will be totally familiar with. But just a reminder to take care of yourself. If you need to step away at all during the workshop, you can do so. This workshop is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. So know that you can tune back in if you want to. We do have a self-care page, which I'll link in the chat if that's helpful to you. And just a reminder, myself and Betania are here moderating for the Witches Confluence. So if you have anything that you need to let us know about, feel free to private message us. And you can also email info@witchesconfluence.org with the subject line safety if there's anything that you need support with. Really just so excited to be here, reminding you that Metztli is not only a teacher with us this year, but they are also part of our magical marketplace. So definitely go check that out. The discount code is MAGIC, all capital, 2020 for a little special discount for being at the Confluence this year. Is there anything else that I'm missing?
No, not that I can think of.
I'll just let you take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me and for facilitating this amazing, very large space for community. This is fantastic to see people from all over and to hear, the names of all of our relatives of all the four directions is really beautiful, especially as an Indigenous person. Just seeing those names on the screen is just really powerful. So thank you all for being here. Welcome to Intersectionality and Intuition. I am Metztli, Alexandria, of revolutionarymystic.com. And I am so excited to be here with you all as well. So I will share a little bit about myself if we haven't met before, if this is our first time meeting. But I am broadcasting to you all from the stolen land of the Pomo peoples who are still here. And my little sister Cheyenne is actually of that tribe. She's a registered member. And, just so you know, that's where I'm from. It's also known as so-called Santa Rosa, California, here in fiery wine country. And so, yeah, that's where I'm broadcasting to you all from, in California. I am from the Bay Area, and Revolutionary Mystic is the spaces where I serve my community via my podcast, which is also called Revolutionary Mystic, my online Hoodoo Botanica, which, Casey just mentioned that I'm part of the magical marketplace. So you can check all of that out there. I handcraft everything from spell candles to baths and conjure oils, things like that. And I also have a global social media community, and as kind of an online resource for subversive leftist witches. So you can find us on Facebook groups. It's called Revolutionary Mystics. For those of you that are interested in subversive leftist witchcraft, we're a very fun, welcoming community. And I think a lot of folks, or I hear a lot of folks really enjoy this space, and I invite you to be there with us. So I am also a psychic medium and a hoodoo root worker, an evolutionary astrologer, an online educator, obviously, and a paranormal specialist. And I professionally began all of this on an official basis in 2012. So I've officially, professionally been doing this for about 8 years now. But really, I've been this way my whole life. Being a psychic medium is something that it is your life from the get-go. And so at some point or another, I realized that was, what I was supposed to do here. And so I love my work. I love sharing all of this stuff with you all. and I love teaching. So thank you for being here and allowing me to share in what is my joy. So I hope you enjoy it as well. I am, are you ready for this? A queer, disabled, two-spirit, Black and Indigenous person of color. An anarchist Satanist witch with a mutual aid mission to provide spiritual scholarships to Black Indigenous people of color and to start a wolf sanctuary. Yes, really. So I know that's a lot to wrap your head around. What I'm just letting you know is my identities. I also, in case you keep seeing my arm waving around and are wondering what the hell is going on with my arm, speaking of wolves, I may or may not have a broken hand, but I'm good. So it's all wrapped up and bandaged. You know, the full moon this week and Mercury retrograde plus one of my big wolfy girls, you know, I got bit, but I'm doing okay. And I wanted to let you all know a little bit about me and what my mission is. Because part of what I do is with the intent of both bringing spiritual scholarships to Black and Indigenous people of color, because I think that, you know, spiritual services and education and things like that shouldn't be a privilege. And a lot of these things that are our ancestral practices aren't necessarily very accessible to us. And so I kind of want to change that. So I offer mutual aid scholarships through crowdfunding on Patreon. So that is one of the things I do. The other part of this whole Revolutionary Mystic mission is to start a wolf sanctuary. And yes, I know that's really wild, but I absolutely want to continue to do this work and have a wolf sanctuary where folks can visit our sacred relatives and learn about them and why it's so imperative that we protect them. So yeah, lots of work on my plate, and just know that when you are participating in Revolutionary Mystic stuff, that's what it's all about. So you can find me all over the internet. And like I mentioned before, I am a magical marketplace vendor. So, you know, you can find me a lot of places, whether it's YouTube or Instagram, all that good stuff. Really quickly, I'm going to go over my house guidelines. You know, Casey mentioned some beautiful things about taking care of yourself. Please absolutely do take care of yourself. Because of the time allotted and the nature of how I am as a teacher, there's a lot of content for us to get through. So I might be talking kind of quick. And that also happens because I'm a psychic medium. And so I like start to channel and I get on a really like fast frequency. So, but know that this is recorded. And so you can access it later. You will also have access to these slides via a downloadable like PDF that Casey's going to send out to all of you. And yeah, so here's a little bit about my guidelines for when I'm teaching. If you can, please make sure all your personal devices are turned to like vibrate or silent, if possible. And that's not because obviously I can't hear you all because you're all muted, but it's because it's to help maintain a sacred energetic container. I'm a psychic medium, and so I'm incredibly sensitive to energy, as you might imagine. So if you're able to do that, you know, if you can't, I totally understand. You know, life has its own things, but you can turn your devices to silent or vibrates. That way, you know, the energy stays focused. So obviously, duplication of my material is totally prohibited. And I would love for you to have a pen and paper handy for your notes and your questions. Because sometimes our questions come up, and then when it comes to a question and answer break, you might forget. And so it's really good to just like, oh, I do have a question, like write it down. The other good thing about having pen and paper handy is for intuitive purposes. I am going to share so much information with you. I would be amazed and wildly impressed if you were able to absorb it all in one sitting. And knowing that that's not likely, writing down things that strike you particularly on an intuitive level are very important, because those are very likely messages that your soul, spirit, consciousness, etc., and so forth are really ready to receive right now. So if something really grabs your attention, really resonates with you, you know, gives you a good feeling in your stomach, you know, you get the chills, whatever it is, that's something that you might want to write down and reflect upon later. So I would love for you to submit your questions in the chat box. So that way my assistant Jenna can see and notify me, or save them for the 2 question and answer breaks we will have. And please, if you can, keep questions as relevant to the class material as possible. Staying on task helps me stay focused. And like I told you, I really love sharing all of this stuff with you all. And so I could, you know, do this all day long, no problem. We could go on a massive adventure. But, you know, we have an hour and a half. So I'm going to try and rein it in as best as I can. And I would love for you all to just have fun. You know, this is, you know, somewhat serious material, I guess, in some regards, or in a lot of regards, but, you know, have fun. And if you enjoy what I do, how I teach, et cetera, and so forth, please tell your friends. And of course, my intention for you all is to gain a functional knowledge of how to work with intersectionality as a tool for your decolonizing your consciousness and unfucking your intuition, right? No small task, but we will get there, I promise. Oh, thank you. I'm glad y'all like these boundaries. Okay, so here's what we're gonna learn today. Today, you know, since we are in the theme of awakening intuition, is the theme of the Modern Witches Confluence this year, we will be doing so revolutionary mystic style. So we will be merging both science and metaphysics, and so we can understand, and also like sociopolitical stuff. We're going to take a holistic snapshot of what's going on for us psychically, and how we can turn certain blocks into breakthroughs. So in general, that's what we're going to do today. Specifically, we're going to go over, you know, what is intersectionality? What is intuition really? How do we use these things to awaken intuition? We're going to briefly go over how your intuition works on like a neuroscience level, and an experiential level too. And we will talk about like the real enemies of intuition, because that's the whole point of this class. Is in my life experience, I have heard a lot of things about what causes blocks in our intuition and all of that type of stuff. And what I've noticed is that there's something underlying it all, and it's not, you know, in the mainstream, it's not necessarily being addressed to the core of the issue. And so I hope to address that today. We will also go over our most common biases, our most common psychic blocks. We will do a bit of a question and answer and a group discussion. Below is that reminder for me to try and keep that to 40 minutes. And then we'll go into part 2, which will be identifying your intersections and understanding what our colonial lens is. Sigh, yes, we all have one, but we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about colonial blocks and how we can turn them into psychic breakthroughs. And we're going to talk about reframing our colonial thoughts, banishing spiritual bypassing, healing all the harm from that stuff, and using the framework for yourself. All right. And then we will do a bit of a question and answer again, and that will be the end of class. So I have so much material to share with y'all. So I'm just going to jump right into it, and let's do this. Yes, let's do this. I love that you said that at the same time. So what is intersectionality? You know, I don't want to assume that everybody knows what that means. So we're going to talk about what that is. It's an analytic framework created by living Black ancestress Kimberly Crenshaw. All right. It is defined as the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. And then I said, AKA a lens with which we can understand the compounding layers of oppression and privilege, okay? Because things overlap. You know, it's interesting, before I had this language, when I was a little witch, growing up, I understood that I had multiple identities that were marginalized. And because I didn't have the language, I would say, like, and I'm talking like pretty young, I would say when I was about like 8 or 10, I would say, you know, it's like I'm a minority of a minority of a minority. But then I would say, but my mom tells me we're not actually the minority, so I'm not sure what that means. And what I really was talking about was this thing called intersectionality that I didn't know. I didn't know that word, but I was trying to really like get a grasp on what my experience was, you know? So let's see here. In Kimberly Crenshaw's own words, intersectionality is an analytic sensibility, a way of thinking about identity and its relationship to power. Originally articulated on behalf of Black women, the term brought to light the invisibility of the many constituents within groups that claim them as members but often fail to represent them. So that was said by Kimberly Crenshaw herself. Kimberly Crenshaw is an American lawyer, civil rights advocate, a philosopher, and a leading scholar of critical race theory who developed the theory of intersectionality. She's a full-time professor at the UCLA School of Law and Columbia Law School, where she specializes in race and gender issues. So, you know, she gave us this wonderful perspective and understanding of so many of our lived experiences. You know, what does it mean to be disabled and Black? What does it mean to be queer and brown? You know, all of these things. And, or what does it mean to be male and gay? You know, like there are various intricacies and nuances. And like she mentions, it's all about overlap of like power and privilege and how our identities relate to those things. All right. So now that we know what intersectionality is, let's talk a little bit about intuition. It's the language of our psychic self, okay? And folks ask me all the time, like, you know, Metztli, do you think everybody has psychic abilities? You know, what are your thoughts on that type of thing? And my answer is always yes. You know, and it really just kind of depends on your life experience, to what capacity, where you're at with it, you know, but with everything, I feel like there's infinite possibility, and it is absolutely possible to build those skills and that awareness. And that's what we're going to do today. Intersectionality is going to help us build that understanding and expand our psychic skills. So if it's the language of our psychic self, it is defined as the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. I think that's kind of interesting. And this is like, you know, straight from like a dictionary, whatever, and there's politics that go along with the dictionary, and like what types of people get to define words and who they're authored by, you know. And so without the need for conscious reasoning, I kind of have some feelings about that. I don't think that psychic understanding and conscious reasoning are necessarily mutually exclusive. But I do like the ability to understand something immediately. All right. Okay. I say it's AKA your inner knowing, communicated through your psychic senses or abilities, from which you receive information by sensing and interpreting the communications within the subtle energies of our quantum field. That's kind of a mouthful. So if it's the language of your psychic self, well, then you also have these various psychic senses. Most commonly known, people talk about clairvoyance. That's the ability to see clearly psychically. Or clairaudience, the ability to receive psychic information auditorily, things like that. So we receive those informations by sensing and interpreting communications within the subtle energies of our quantum field. So we have what's called a subtle energetic body. Oftentimes people refer to that as your aura and things like that. Everything has like a subtle energy body, and there is a part of our brain that absorbs all of the changes within that subtle energy field. That's what I'm talking about. Like, your quantum field is basically everything around you and beyond what you can even like see or hold space for in your consciousness. So it's this, thing we call reality, right? And so there are subtle shifts in the subtle energetic field happening all the time. And there is so much information that your brain is consciously taking in and subconsciously taking in. And, so it's noticing things that you may not necessarily be comprehending consciously, but it is happening there. And so when we have a psychic communication, it's simply like being aware of those things that you might not otherwise typically be aware of. It's simple as like walking into a room, having no idea what had just transpired in that room before you walked in there, but immediately sensing that like something's wrong, or like something is off, or maybe the people in the room are really like angry, like maybe there was just a fight in the room or something like that. Those are things that it's not just like random. That's your being's incredible power to receive all of that input from the subtle energy field shifting before you've even opened the door, or as soon as you open the door, like then you feel it, depending on how attuned your psychic self is. So it's a little bit about our psychic self. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are going to be awakening and deepening intuition by using an intersectional lens to heal our colonial wounds. All right, so we live under colonialism. That's the way it is, all of us. And so it's helpful to have this lens, so that way we can take back the power and our sovereignty over our psychic self. As I mentioned before, in my lived and professional experience as a psychic medium, mainstream modern spirituality is inherently colonial and very whitewashed, and conveniently missing a major piece of our psychic blocks because it doesn't serve the power structure that is whiteness and white supremacy to address their true origins. And if we did, it actually dismantles those things. And so it's very convenient that we would miss exactly everything that we're going to talk about. And that's my theory as to why the mainstream spirituality doesn't get that stuff. The lie that we're told is that the enemies of intuition are natural aspects of our humanity. Things like fear, quote unquote, negative thoughts, self-doubt, emotionality, or skepticism. But the truth is that colonialism is our enemy, not the way that we naturally are. And colonial trauma and internal bias will disrupt and repress your psychic ability every time. And I think we can all agree probably that we're born intuitively gifted. That fades for most of us not because of age or the development of our rational mind necessarily, but because the colonial lens is repeatedly forced upon us as we get older, and it infiltrates our conscious mind. Why? Well, imperialism seeks to destroy everything that threatens its power. So things like truth and those with the ability to see it would be very, very convenient for them to, want to repress and destroy as best they can our psychic ability, our psychic knowing, that power within. All right. Oh yeah, I love it. Y'all are starting to get it. You see where I'm going. Okay. So how intuition really works, all right? Intuition can be received by any of your senses. When input is received, it is then processed by your brain, okay? So, like I said, subtle changes in the energetic field, they reach your conscious mind, and that's where, your brain analyzes, thinks and plans. That's where your short-term memory lives, et cetera, and so forth. And then there's your critical mind. And this is where a lot of like the colonial stuff happens, which you'll get to understand more on the next slide. But your critical mind determines whether intuition can reach your conscious mind or not. Have you ever had an intuition about something, a gut feeling about something, and then you talked yourself out of it? Have you ever had an inspiration, like, oh, there's this thing I really got to do. I really just want to have a wolf sanctuary. I don't know why. I just really want to do that. And then, a voice inside of your consciousness says, that's really irrational. How in the hell are you going to make that happen? Metztli, you're disabled. Like, how are you going to do all that? You can barely do, whatever it is that comes through your critical mind is going to criticize that divine information, that divine inspiration, and will be trying to talk you out of it a lot of times. And so instead of staying in your conscious mind where you can analyze it and think and plan and access your short-term memory to say, I've made some pretty impossible things happen before. So maybe this is probable and not as impossible as I think. Well, when that doesn't happen, our critical mind decides to shove it down in our subconscious. Okay, this is where we hold our long-term memory, emotions and feelings, habits, relationship patterns, addictions, involuntary body functions, creativity, developmental stages, spiritual connection, and intuition, and intergenerational trauma, ancestral wisdom, and the evolutionary journey of your soul. There's a lot of stuff down there, right? So we kind of just like shove it back, and it's called repression. You repress that thought of this grand vision of something that you might be feeling a calling to do, or you're sitting at a job interview and you start to get this like sinking feeling in your stomach, and you're like, I'm not so sure that this is the place for me. And then the person across the table from you says, oh, but you'd be making all this money and yada yada, we'd love to offer you the position. And all of a sudden, your critical mind, because of colonialism, is going to very likely be biased to favor your survival for number one, and be like, I need to make a lot of money. And also, secondary to that, capitalism, like they just mentioned a lot of money. And so we would prioritize that very likely over that sinking feeling in our stomach, and be like, you know what, I'm gonna muscle through this. Like this will probably fine. I'm probably just nervous, like whatever it is, however we gaslight ourselves, like, maybe I didn't eat a good breakfast before this job interview. Maybe that's why my stomach feels funny, right? And so then we would shove that feeling that we initially had down into our subconscious. So our goal, though, is to reprogram the subconscious and conscious minds to work together. Yeah. Yep. Maddie says that has literally happened to me. It took 2 years to quit. Absolutely. Yep. I've done that too. I've been there. Okay. So, yeah. Brina says, same, 7 years to get divorced. I can also relate to that. um, you know, so more on how intuition works. We talk about left brain, right brain. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not that's a real thing. I will say that whether or not it's a real thing, symbolically it works, you know, for what we're trying to articulate. So folks that tend to use their left brain more efficiently tend to be highly logical people, folks that are interested in math and use language well, you know, like very articulate, maybe very academically spoken, et cetera, and so forth, very pragmatic, interested in clear results, and could be very successful in academic and scientific subjects. So, you know, there's that side of the brain we call left brain. Then there's right brain, which is the more creative, interested in social studies, subjective, intuitive, which is what we need to know about, and successful in visual and artistic subjects such as art and music. So if we live in a society that values this left side of the brain so much more, it's so wild. Like, think about it. It comes up actually really quite often. So, you know, anytime there's budget cuts to be made anywhere, but let's say in public schools, you know, the first thing that is going to be on the chopping block is anything that's right brain. So I'm talking, you know, music classes, yeah, art classes, anything that involves the creative, maybe even like counseling for the kids, like all of that right brain stuff is going to be the first to go. Because we live in a society, a colonial society, that values all this left brain stuff just so much more. And it's wild because there's nothing that says that one is better than the other. They're both amazing and great things. And, you know, just because the people with all the positions of power have their internal bias to say that this is what's important. Because these things do, why is it important? They do serve the power structure that is whiteness and white supremacy. These things do serve patriarchy, you know, these things do serve capitalism, et cetera, and so forth. Exactly. See, Jess said, one feeds capitalism. Yes. So much bias for what you, quote unquote, need most, like Erica said. It's totally true. Absolutely true. You know, so just knowing that society is always under colonialism going to be leaning on this side and downplaying this side, and that we know innately in our hearts that one is not better than the other, you know? So another thing that will help you understand your intuition is understanding that, like I said, it tends to be stored in your subconscious, which is your limbic system. When I was teaching science to autistic teenage youth, we called it the downstairs brain. And your downstairs brain will jump in if you are in a situation that is unsafe or your brain thinks is unsafe, you know, and it puts us into fight or flight mode, all of that stuff. It brings out our instincts. Okay. So that's where that happens. And then what's interesting is they call this the limbic system, where our intuition, our creativity is. And then I think it's very biased that they call this portion of the brain the rational brain, but I guess it's because that's where all your reasoning skills are theoretically located. And so what we want to do is bring the stuff from the limbic system, stuff from the subconscious brain, and bring it into our rational brain and train our rational brain to dismiss its biases. So it also says uncertainty makes your brain yield control to the limbic system. So if you live in a world that is constantly gaslighting you, constantly making you feel uncertain of yourself, unsure, you know, like all of this stuff because of these various oppressive structures, you know, that's going to make your brain yield control to the limbic system, which might not necessarily have you access your intuition, but put you in a state of fight or flight, which can activate various like defense and protection mechanisms, which we'll get into. A lot of them are of our colonial conditioning. Yes. Yes, they are afraid of what can't be measured. They're afraid of our power, you know? Okay. So a little bit more on how intuition really works. There's a thing called the gut-brain axis. So when we say gut feelings, there's a lot of very valid science to what a gut feeling is, okay? So the ability of the brain to influence the intestinal microbiota. Oh yay, I can say it today. Last night I was like, so basically the gut-brain axis, you know, there is communication between your brain and your gut happening all the time. And the ability of the microbiota, it influences your brain and your behavior. So like I mentioned, that sinking feeling in your stomach, that's an intuition, you know? And so if this helps you remember, if you can remember about the gut-brain axis and remember that that is a part of your intuition, yes, I can't remember, yes, I will share my sources for the gut-brain axis. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I will. If you can remember that that is a thing and that they communicate back and forth, that will help you hopefully not gaslight yourself and be like, oh, you know, like I'm feeling a little uneasy about this and maybe I should listen into that, you know? Okay. So let's see, I also provided this little chart down here for folks that are, you know, interested in understanding a little bit more of our consciousness. Because we talk about, like, in spirituality, we talk about ego a lot, right? We talk about ego, we talk about ourself, our shadow self, but where does that really like sit in the scheme of our consciousness? So, you know, on the periphery of, in our conscious plane, there's our persona. Then there's our ego, which is, you know, it's our ego. And then below that, unconscious is our self. It's our true self. And then underneath that is also our shadow. That shadow is just the aspects of self that are repressed or just blatantly unconscious. And, you know, it's interesting in the spiritual community, I could do like a whole other class on what shadow is, but, you know, we have this in the mainstream. There's a very commonality, like how we talk about shadows. It's this like part of us that we want to like cure or, you know, smother it with light or something. And there's nothing, you know, necessarily bad or broken about your shadow. It's something that's just been unseen or unaddressed, and it's a facet of you, you know? So it's absolutely worthy of love and attention and the same care that you give all the other aspects of yourself. And yes, there is also inherent anti-Blackness and colorism inside of exactly that rhetoric. So it's very interesting, and I mean interesting and, you know, not in a pleasurable way, obviously, but it's noteworthy, we'll say, that we polarize things in terms of, you know, shadow and light, black and white, you know, and then think about how that really relates to this very racialized society and very colorist society we live in, and how anti-Blackness is literally in everything, even in our spiritual language, okay? So, you know, just some food for thought in regard to your shadow and your consciousness, things like that. Oh, cool. Thanks for sharing links on the gut-brain axis. Yes, yes. Yes, yes. I understand about anxiety and the gut-brain axis, and how it can make it difficult to understand and know when to listen to your intuition, and like where your anxiety might be thwarting you and things like that. That's one of those things I could do a whole other class on. I live with tremendous anxiety, so I know what you mean. And I will definitely say it is incredibly possible to learn how to differentiate between the two most of the time. You know? Okay. So another thing I also want you to know about your cognition and intuition and things like that is that so you can access your intuition at, you know, any state of consciousness, but if you are going to get yourself to purposefully like kind of like facilitate that and go there, you would be accessing theta waves in your brain. So there's alpha, beta, delta, and theta. Fun fact, cats live on theta waves, which is why I think they're so wacky, because they literally, their dominant consciousness, like when they're awake, they're in what we experience as like our dream state. So that's how they experience life. That's also how cats are highly intuitive beings. I don't know about your cats, but my cats know me like from top to bottom. They know when I'm sad, all that good stuff. And so just remember that, you know, theta waves is usually when we enter a state of meditation. And so a lot of folks that are teaching about intuition will we'll go over, you know, how important it is to meditate. I want to let you know, like as a spiritual teacher, as a psychic medium, sometimes I love meditation, sometimes I don't want to be bothered with it, and that's perfectly like normal, human, etc. and so forth. Oh yeah, cats live in theta waves. Yes, yeah, that's their like state of consciousness, which is why they're so, you know, Cheshire cat like. So, you know, that's also why, so theta waves occur when we're daydreaming or drifting off to sleep. In this state, we're more relaxed and thinking moves more freely, boosting creativity and intuition, right? So, you know, if a cat lives in theta waves, this is why, like, when you're hanging out with your cat and your cat starts to look behind you and watch something walk, like there's something behind you, it's probably because it's probably some sort of like spirit or entity, because they are just like intuitively on all the time. I wish I lived in theta all the time too. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't remember if dogs live in theta or if they bounce back and forth between like we do, because they obviously have a highly instinctual state of being too. I mean, like, look at wolves, right? So anyway, that's why, you know, part of what I'm going to ask you to do is a form of meditation to access some of the neuroplasticity things we're going to be working with, because it helps you access your intuition. Okay, so this is something I'm actually not going to go through in depth, because you're going to have access to this in a PDF form. Because, you know, again, I don't want to assume that everybody knows the types of intuitive ability, but they are commonly known as clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairempathy, clairtangency, claircognizance. And so, you know, you can have a dominant one of these, you can be killer at all of these, you can be, you know, killer at clairaudience and, you know, really struggle with the rest. It really just depends on who you are and how you've lived life and where your psychic wounds are, where your psychic blocks are, things like that. Clairaudience, clairalience, clairgustance. things like that. So like I said, all of your senses can receive intuitive input and communicate them to you. So I will also be, so if you're wondering like, oh my goodness, like, do I have any of these things? If you probably do. You probably have many of them. They're actually quite common. We just don't know to identify them as such. So I put some common signs of these abilities, you know, clairaudience. If you are somebody who hears buzzing in your ears or ringing sounds, that is a common symptom of clairaudience. Also, though, cautionary tale, it is also can be a medical issue as well. So, you know, if that's something that happens to you, you obviously want to make sure that that's not a medical issue for you. I have both. Yeah, tinnitus. I have one of the many things I have is thyroid disease, and with that comes like ringing in my ears sometimes. And I also have clairaudience, right? So how do you navigate that? Well, you know, it's like, I will ask my guides if I'm like, all right, am I having like an autoimmune thing? Yeah, I also have TMJ, like Kristen said. If you have TMJ, you probably also have ringing in your ears. How do you navigate whether this is a physical symptom that's just random, or is this an intuitive thing? Well, I ask my guides for 3 clear signs when I'm unsure. You know, I'm like, all right, well, that was sign number 1. I'm going to need 2 more signs in order for you to get my attention, to confirm that this is something that is intuitive and not like just a random like symptom of autoimmune disease. Yes, sometimes losing part of your hearing for a moment is clairaudience as well. That is absolutely something your guides might choose to do to grab your attention. And again, though, that is also something that can be indicative of something medical. So always rule out the medical stuff, and also explore your intuitive stuff, and know that you can have both, or it can just be the medical thing, or it can just be an intuitive thing, right? They're not mutually exclusive. Okay. So let's see here. Like a lot of us, I'm going to guess probably most of us have some clairsentience. These are highly sensitive individuals. I am a highly sensitive person. It's quite ridiculous. I get extremely overwhelmed in crowds of people. On a screen like this, fantastic. You put me in Disneyland, I'm like, oh my God. I love being there, but I'm like, oh my God, so many people. And if you have clairsentience, you know, you can often experience like places will feel, see again with like the binary words, light or heavy, you know, there could be some ableism in that language too, but you know what I'm saying? It can feel intense or easy, right? For me, that's going to the doctor's office. Like I cannot deal with the emergency room, the hospital. Don't ask me to go there unless I really have to. So yeah, that's a form of clairsentience, okay? So you probably have a lot of these things, and you're gonna start to identify and understand, like, my goodness, I have quite a bit of intuitive abilities going on, which is really cool, right? Things they don't teach us in school. I wish they did. Sure would be a lot better than Algebra 2. Okay. So let's talk about the real enemies of intuition. All right. Now, we get a lot of messages from a lot of spiritual teachers, and I want you to know that like every good teacher will tell you to question everything, even what they're telling you, including myself. Like, please feel free to be skeptical. You know, yes, you're going to get a PDF of my slides. You know, like do your own research and things like that. And also, like, just in general, it's good to be curious in that way, right? So we get a lot of messages from spiritual teachers, and I want to say that the bulk of what I see in the mainstream in regard to intuition is inherently harmful. And I believe that a lot of that is due to who gets to claim most of the, mainstream limelight as far as being a spiritual teacher goes. I'm thinking of all the big names in spirituality, and a lot of them share a lot of the same socioeconomic, sociopolitical identities, It's just because we live under colonialism, but it still sucks. So let's think about some of the messages we hear and what they really are, because maybe it's you or maybe it's colonialism. And this is something that I think about rather often and talk to my therapist about all the time. Like, do I really have this, or do I just live under colonialism, or are both true? So, I hear from people a lot of the time that they believe that they grew out of their intuition, and that's just something that we just grow out of our intuition. I'm like, why? Why would we do that? Like, why would you come here with a killer intuition, like babies do? Why would we grow out of that? Or, did you grow out of your intuition, or were you taught to value and prioritize your left brain more in settler education systems, right? Did psychic abilities skip your generation? Or was psychic repression part of the assimilation and survival of your ancestors or parents, right? This particularly can pertain to folks who have at some point in their family lineage, like, abandoned their ancestral practices or beliefs and for survival, for the colonizers' beliefs, for the colonizers' religion, the colonizers' spirituality, things like that. And, there's quite a lot of the elders in my family that are really religious. And, so I have to wonder, based on what I know of their religion, like, was psychic repression part of their assimilation? Is that why we talk about it, like, kind of like almost like old wives' tales, like behind closed doors, when like there's not very many people in the room and we're all sitting around a pot of gumbo? Like, is that why it's kind of like this hush hush thing where we talk about our dreams and our intuitions and things like that? Is psychic phenomena, quote unquote, evil? Or does the colonizer conflate religion to vilify your birth rates, right? Did you stop experiencing your intuition, or does the world around you deny and gaslight your inner knowing? I'm telling you, I hear people say all the time, like, I had an experience, it was really scary, so I shut out my intuition, and it hasn't really been there ever since. I'm like, oh, I totally relate to that. A lot of us have psychic trauma, especially if you were a very sensitive kid growing up and you saw things that the adults weren't explaining, or maybe they gaslit you over, like you're seeing dead people and they're telling you there's not a boogeyman in your closet, but you're like, yo, for real, there's a dead person in my closet. Like, that was experiences that I grew up with. And so at some point I thought that I shut out my intuition, that I stopped it, but you can't, like, truly shut it out. What happens is, like I said earlier, it just goes from being in a conscious part of our brain and it becomes repressed and gets shoved deep into our subconscious. So it's always there, it's always communicating to us. Whether or not we are accessing it is, depends on what's happened and what's happening now. So, is it hard to access your intuition, or does the patriarchy disrupt your inner voice at every turn? Every turn. Would having no childhood memories be part of the gaslighting and denial system? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's also a symptom of trauma. Part of my story is I grew up in trauma, like, from before I was born all the way through my developmental years, all the way through being an adult, things like that. I've had a very traumatic life. And so, not having those memories is how your brain defends itself, and it protects you. So you can work to retrieve those types of things. That is something that I do with my therapist. You can also do that with certain hypnotism. My my friend Eldon's gonna. He does that. He does like the like soul retrieval, like EMDR. Thank you, all that good stuff. Yeah, so you can access those things again because they're there. They're not gone. They're just deep in your subconscious. You know, and so does anxiety interfere with your psychic sentences, or are we taught to spiritually bypass ourselves and each other? Yeah. I have anxiety and I have, you know, some pretty killer psychic skills. They don't have to erase each other, and we are just absolutely taught to gaslight ourselves. So, are you too sensitive? Oh, I hear that one all the time. I'm just too sensitive, or they're too sensitive. You know, are you too sensitive, or are you sensing something that disrupts the colonial model? Probably. You know, are you too negative? That's the one I get all the time. Are you too negative, or are there many things worthy of your criticism and scrutiny? Hell yeah, there are. You know, are you imagining things, or is there more than meets the eye of humanity out there? Yes, we don't know everything. Science doesn't know everything. And like anytime somebody wants to get fundamentally scientific on you, like, and trust me, like I love science. Like I told you a few moments ago, like I used to teach science. I love science so much. Like thought I was going to become an astrophysicist when I grew up. That's how much I love science. Like you can straight up look somebody in the eye and be like, historically, science has been wrong many times. So if you tell me that this isn't factual because, you know, like science hasn't figured it out yet, that's all it means. The science hasn't figured it out yet. So quit trying to gaslight me and my experiences, you know? So another thing that has really helped me is it all in your head, or why does that even matter? What does that mean? Why would it being in your head make it less real to you? You know, like that's a really good question. Are you afraid of second guessing yourself again? I hear that from a lot of folks that are, you know, experiencing fear with their intuition. Like, you know, I just second guess myself a lot and I don't know how to stop doing that. You know, I understand, you know, are you afraid of second guessing yourself again? Or is that fear asking you to heal your self-trust, right? Is your fear legitimate, or is it your implicit bias? Because that's another one too. All right. Right. When people ask if magic is real, I'm like, it's as real as science is. Like, they're just two different lenses, two different models of understanding and exploring and validating. You know, intuition is very experiential. And there's also, evidential mediumship. Thank you. Like, you know, yeah, I will explain that last one for a second. Thank you, Kiara. Evidential mediumship, like people want to debunk psychics all the time. And I will tell you right now, like, I don't even bother with those people. I find them amusing, you know, but there are people that do what's called evidential mediumship, and they are able to access stuff psychically that you will be able to go back and fact verify. And more mediums, honestly, and it's something that I'm even like working on and studying, and will probably study for the rest of my life, being more of an evidential medium, developing that skill. So that way, you know, you can throw out, like, yes, I will talk to your, you know, deceased uncle, but let me also access something that there's no way I could have possibly known unless I was actually talking to that person. So that way you have an undeniable piece of evidence that I am doing what I say I am doing, right? So that exists out there. All right, the last one I mentioned, because Kiara wanted me to go back over it, is your fear legitimate, or is it your implicit bias? This one is very tricky. It deals with a lot of what we're going to go over in the next slide. It's like, here's my perfect example. The neighborhood I live in is very suburban. I have a lot of like what we call like working class, middle-aged white people that live on my block, and they're all terrified of me. Look at me. What is terrifying about me? I don't know. They're all fucking terrified of me. Is their fear of me legitimate, or is it their implicit bias? It's their fucking implicit bias. You know what I mean? So that is one of the ways that we can differentiate between an intuitive fear, you know, like, I don't know if I should, you know, walk to the corner store tonight. I kind of have like a weird feeling about going by myself, you know, like that's something. Yeah. Is there a difference between colonial gaslighting and the abuse of gaslighting in a relationship? Nope, they are the same. So colonial gaslighting, it implies and includes all of the power structures within colonialism. One of them would be patriarchy, like sexism, racism, all of those isms, thinking about that. So anytime that somebody is gaslighting somebody else, doesn't matter, you know, like there is a power dynamic in play. You know, why are they gaslighting that person? What is that about? And it's it's about their implicit bias or their explicit bias, hopefully an implicit bias. Yeah. And Brianna says, I find that because of colonial gaslighting, I have gotten really good at self-gaslighting. Me too. And yeah, working on it, right? It's something that like we're going to work on as long as we live in this environment. You know, we exist in this water, so to speak. So I hope that question about relationship and colonial gaslighting makes more sense in the slides that we're about to go through. Yes, we do internalize it. It's in everything. It's in everywhere you look, you know, and we fight and it's constant. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like I mentioned before, we have biases. There are two kinds that I'm going to talk about. There's implicit or explicit. So implicit is our unconscious bias. It operates outside of the person's awareness and can be in direct contradiction to a person's espoused beliefs and values. What is so dangerous about implicit bias is that it automatically seeps into a person's affect or behavior and is outside of the full awareness of that person. Implicit bias can interfere with many things, including your intuition. The biggest one that I can conjure up, maybe because it's just so vastly global, is, you know, anti-Blackness. So if you're not a Black person, you're going to carry far more implicit or unconscious bias against Black people, because anti-Blackness is global. It's global and it's deeply ingrained and at the heart of colonialism, okay? So, like I said, it exists outside of the person's awareness and can be in direct contradiction to a person's espoused beliefs and values. All right, you know, how many people do you know that are quote unquote not racist, but they're also not doing their anti-racism work, or they have just said something that was terribly racist, or just, you know, perpetuated racism in a massive way, but they have this espoused belief and value, you know, that like, well, I know racism is bad and I'm not racist, and that's enough, you know. And we all hold implicit bias, you know, and, you know, even within the Black community, like, you can hold anti-Blackness against each other in various ways. It's literally, like I keep referring to, like the water we live in. Unfortunately, just some of us have more power within that water. Like obviously a white person, their implicit bias is incredibly deadly, as we know, especially this year. Oh, yay, my cat Malice is chiming in. Okay. Yes, like the way respectability politics reinforce white supremacy within the Black community. Holy hell, yes, that strikes home for me, you know? And I get where that comes from. It comes from assimilation and survival, and, you know, being told over and over and over again that the American dream is that's what you want. That's, you know, that's what success is. And so, you know, they wanted to separate themselves as far as they can from the perception that white people have over Blackness. And what it ends up doing is we end up like modeling our oppressors and then like passing that down, or holding other people to that standard. And that's incredibly oppressive. Yep. I'll tell you, it doesn't work well either. Yeah, the American dream is definitely gaslighting. So that's implicit bias. There's explicit bias as well, also known as our conscious bias. The person is very clear about their feelings and attitudes, and related behaviors are conducted with intent. This type of bias is processed neurologically at a conscious level as declarative, semantic memory, and in words. So, an explicit or conscious bias. I told you I have a lot of trauma in my life, right? I am in trauma recovery probably for the rest of my life. I also live with CPTSD. Now, I know that I have an explicit bias against cis-het men. And, you know, it's just the way it is. And luckily, you know, like I don't have much in the scheme of like the power dynamics, like that explicit bias doesn't oppress them because I don't have the power to do that, but it's there, you know. And you know, it's kind of like, sorry about it. So Cody wants to know, if you ask someone why they are angry because they are presenting angry and they say they are not, is that implicit gaslighting when you insist that they seem angry? It can be, you know, it can be a lot of things. So I will use the example of a Black woman at work. You know, I hear this from my mother all the time. Like if you were to confront someone like that at work and ask why they're angry, and because they're presenting angry, you're reading those, you know, subtle signs of somebody's body, and they say that they are not, is it implicit gaslighting when you insist that they seem angry? I wouldn't say it's gaslighting. I would say it can be harmful and it can be oppressive, because that person, it might not be safe for them to tell you that they are angry because of the power dynamic between you and the other person. You know, I know from my experience when I worked for, you know, agencies and nonprofits and whatever, a lot of times I had to like hold my tongue and like keep that shit in, you know, for fear of like losing my job, or, you know, losing favor with your supervisor, like whatever the hell it is, facing unfair repercussions for expressing like a Black experience, or, you know, something of my queerness that upset me, things like that. You know, it's really tough. So it's not gaslighting them, but it is kind of like pressuring somebody. Yeah. Yep. Okay, let's see here. All right, we went over implicit and explicit bias. All right. Our biases. So social bias can be positive, and I'm using positive and negative in quotes because I don't actually like those points of reference. I just have yet to come up with language that is readily identifiable to people as the same thing that we view as positive and negative. So social bias can be positive and negative, quote unquote, and refers to being in favor or against individuals or groups based on their social identities. Examples like race, gender, etc. Okay, so if you look at this fantastic graphic that came from, what is it called? AWIS. It's something, American Women in Science or something like that, if I remember correctly. I felt like this is the most thorough, you know, and obviously it probably doesn't include everything, but I thought it was pretty thorough depiction of what privileges and oppressions are, you know, in existence under colonialism. So above this line of domination, because like I said, we're talking about power and our relationship to power. So if you hold any of these identities or experiences above the domination line, those are privileges, okay? So that's things like upper and middle class, you know, that's classism. If you are light-skinned like I am, you know, you hold colorism privilege, things like that. Let's see here. Yeah, like things like if you're able-bodied, then you know that's ableism, things like that. So you hold all these privileges, and some of us have more of them than others. And you know, that is something you always want to be aware of, especially, you know, when you're out in the world, and especially when you're accessing your intuition, either for yourself or for others. So below the domination line are these lines of oppression. And so these are identities or experiences that include oppression. You know, they're not privileges. These are things that count against you in our society, that, you know, push you back, hold you down, things like that. And you're right, Risha, that attractive is so subjective, but so infiltrated by colonial values too. Absolutely. Attractive plays into Eurocentrism. Oh, are the lines to center the biases? Yes? Question mark? You know, so things like attractive, I like to say conventionally attractive. You know, is this somebody that you would see like on the cover of Elle? Is this somebody that you think would be allowed to be on TV? Things like that, you know? And the reason why we can identify that is because we can note whether or not it fits the Eurocentric depiction of beauty. Okay, so we're going to talk about how our biases relate to our privileges and oppression. Bias against these privileged identities, so it's justifiable and it counters colonialism, but it does not absolve bias toward or oppression of persons also of marginalized identities. So, what am I trying to say there? I am trying to say that, you know, you can have a bias against these. You can be prejudiced against these privileges, but it is not inherently harmful. Not at all. But if that person also holds some oppressed identities, you know, like if you are going to be biased against somebody, you know, because they are attractive, but they're also, you know, the working poor, like it's like, well, okay, well, you know, holding space for the fact that they have attractive privilege is one thing, but then also remembering that they're the working poor, like, you know, you need to also reckon with what their hardships are, because your privileges don't erase the parts of you that are oppressed. Yes. Oh yes, absolutely. Fat hatred is in here too. Where is that? I thought I saw it in here. Oh, there's so many facets of this that would play into fat hatred. You know, fat hatred is anti-Black, it's ableism, it's, you know, feeding into the Eurocentric ideal of beauty, et cetera, and so forth. You know, if you want to really get into the, you know, history of where fat hatred comes into play, I highly suggest the book Fearing the Black Body. It will help you understand where fat hatred comes from. Yeah. Yeah, incarceration as well. Incarceration should be on here. Incarcerated individuals would fall under the line of domination. So, yeah. So bias against these oppressed identities is oppressive, right, to marginalized communities in our colonial society, and furthers, and furthers colonial lens as well as our intuitive blocks, okay? So I am basically saying that if you are biased against somebody because you don't find them attractive, that furthers your colonial lens and your intuitive blocks. Your intuition about that person may not necessarily be uninfiltrated because you have a bias against them for not being, you know, conventionally attractive to you, if that's something that is, you know, high up in the hierarchy of your importances, you know. So, okay. Yes. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. My assistant is letting me know that we have like 20 minutes left. Okay. So you guys will have these slides, and, you know, and you'll be able to read this and understand, hopefully, where your privileges and oppressive identities come into play. Okay. So common psychic blocks, right? Your blocks can become breakthroughs. They don't have to stay there forever. It's things like our colonial lens and conditioning, our unhealed psychic wounds and psychic trauma, lack of practice and skill set, our biases, like we mentioned, mistrust in ourselves, betraying yourself on behalf of your oppressor, you know, and sometimes that's not a choice. You know, sometimes you have to survive. Intense attachment to an outcome can be a block too. Personal interest that takes priority over truth. I feel like that's a very common psychic block. And any good psychic will tell you the truth, you know. So expectation versus the reality of your psychic experience can be a block too. If you believe psychic phenomena to be experienced like how you see it on TV, that might not necessarily be true for how you experience your psychic phenomena. So it's very good to get to know yourself on that deep level in order to access it better. The fear of the truth is a block, or your power, also a block. Misinterpreting psychic messages. And I will tell you, every good psychic does it still, myself included. And that's why it's a good idea to become what I call a good psychic detective. You know, it's okay to say that I'm not entirely certain what this symbol I'm receiving is. Can you tell me more about that? Or does this feel like this connects with this person? You know, it's like being a good detective, and that's how you can pinpoint what message is actually trying to come across. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly choose like a couple questions because we're running out of time. You know, like, what are your guys' intuitive blocks? What are your questions you might have? I'll spend a couple minutes on this. Okay, so there's a question that is, as a social worker who works with many folks with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, I'm just sort of curious about holding space for example, psychic gifts versus psychotic symptoms. I say this knowing our modern understanding of diagnoses and mental health is very fraught. Yes. Also, Casey, if this question is just like way too big for this venue, totally understanding. Yeah. That's a really great question. I highly suggest, I wish I had the article at the tip of my fingers, But there was a really good article going around about the indigenous perspectives of the relatives in our community that have this thing that we identify as schizophrenia or schizoactive, you know, disorder, that type of thing. And there are a lot of indigenous spiritual perspectives. It really is an intuitive thing. This is somebody that is accessing, you know, different facets of reality, different dimensions. You know, I will say, so I used to be a social worker, and I had a client who, you know, was a dual diagnosis person, and they had some schizophrenia stuff happening, and she was also blind and wonderful. But anyways, psychically, I will say that the people she was talking to, absolutely real. You know, like I was saying, just because it's happening in your head doesn't mean it's less real. And it's very good to remember that, and just know that consciousness is a very bendy, wibbly wobbly thing, and it is not necessarily linear. And I really appreciate that those people like are accessing levels of consciousness that we are not privy to. And so, you know, I just say, of course, to lovingly and respectfully listen to them and honor their experiences. Okay, I hope that helps. I'll try and find that article. Okay, or Jenna, will you try and find that article on, I think it's like shamanism and schizophrenia, something like that. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna answer one more. Let's see here. All right. Amanda asks, if you feel like you are very blocked or feel like you are questioning yourself often, do you have a recommendation on a first step to get to re-know your intuition? Hell yes, I do. Get yourself like either like a pocket notepad or like a little journal for home, and start documenting your intuitions, and then go back if you can, like either later in the day or later in the week, and start like ticking off which ones you can readily verify. All right. And it's okay if like you don't get to verify it like same day, same week. Sometimes it's like 3 months later, 6 months later. You'll come back and be like, holy shit, I remember when I met that person, I had this feeling and I couldn't figure out why. And now 6 months later, I understand why I was uncomfortable around that person, you know, because time is kind of a thing. But so as things come, and then go back. And then when you feel that like insecurity, that voice of self-doubt, like remind yourself of all the times you were right. Okay. Like, I knew better. When I agreed to date this person, I friggin' knew better and I did it anyway. You know, that type of stuff is really helpful. Okay. Could schizophrenia just be functioning from more theta waves? Absolutely. And I think there's actually a lot of neuroscience studies about that. That would be a good thing to look up. Okay. So, you know, one thing you'll do when you get the PDF is identify your intersections of privilege and oppression, because we all have both, all right, in theory. So, you know, identify where your implicit and complicit biases come from in your privileges, and where your psychic wounds and blocks are put upon us, because they are because of our oppressed identities. You're going to want to identify those. And then this explains your colonial lens. Basically, it's our privileges plus our oppression plus the colonial narrative, which I do further break down here. And it's basically all that's gaslighting, patriarchal crap, you know, that dismisses our psychic gifts as witchcraft or quackery. All of that stuff. When you add it all up together, that becomes the trauma, the wounds, biases, and bullshit that can block or contaminate our natural psychic abilities if they remain repressed, unaddressed, and unhealed, which is exactly why we are going over this. Casey's going to send you guys the PDF when you guys get the link to the replay of class. So you should get it in your email. Okay. Tips for identifying and addressing biases as it specifically shows up and interferes with intuition. Yes, we're on that slide right now. So how you turn a colonial block into a psychic breakthrough. Well, I will try to go over this as quickly as possible because Jenna's going to let me know. Okay, we've got 10 minutes. Oh boy. And I have like 8 more slides. I will be quick. I promise. Okay, so how we do this is using a thing called neuroplasticity. If this is the first time you're hearing about neuroplasticity, welcome to the world of neuroscience and healing magic. I highly recommend you look up neuroplasticity and all of the wonderful ways that healers are using this to really kind of recover from all of these incredibly harmful systems that we live in. And basically the premise is that our brains become hardwired over time. Okay, so if you look at on the left here, so it says, with repeated and direct attention toward a desired change, we all have the ability to rewire our brains. All right. So new thoughts and skills carve out new pathways. Repetition and practice strengthen those pathways, forming new habits. Old pathways get used less and weaken. So the old pathways, the old hardwiring of our brain lies in our indoctrination into colonialism, right? That's all of our implicit biases, yeah? Okay. They say that it takes 21 days to form a new habit, but in terms of neuroplasticity, you would want to do the visualization exercise I'm going to share with you all at least 6 weeks for 5 to 10 minutes a day. If you're busy during the day, try doing the practice before going to bed or first thing in the morning. I hear you, I'm hella busy too. Usually when I'm laying in bed at night before I go to sleep is when I check in with my spirit guides. So yeah, this is where, let's move this out of the way. Okay. This is where the information comes in. This is kind of like a model of how we receive psychic information, right? So we are living in our middle self right now, ourselves in full awareness of where we are and what we're doing, AKA the conscious mind. Then you would, like ask a question, something intuitive, some sort of introspection, and you're going to immediately receive a response from what we refer to as the higher self or our super conscious mind. Now, whether or not you receive it depends on our belief system and memory, aka our subconscious mind. And this is where your implicit and explicit colonial bias and interference can contaminate the communication from your higher self. Your higher self tells you some really rad shit, and then your implicit bias is like, nope. Because we're just conditioned that way. Our brain has been hardwired that way, and it's not our fault. We weren't born that way. Nobody's born racist. So these things become blocks for us, like colonialism, our ego, attachments, sometimes entities, which is a whole other paranormal discussion, fear to know the truth, like I mentioned, other limited beliefs in our subconscious mind. And so those can be blocks, and that information that you were asking for can get kind of stuck here, right? Or if you are doing this work where you're interrogating your biases, et cetera, and so forth, like in the next couple slides, I'll show you, you start to receive the answers. And what happens is you receive the changes in the subtle energy field around you. Your psychic senses respond to the changes in subtle energy field, and you become conscious of the psychic senses response to stimuli. Okay? That's like you walked into the room and it feels icky in there, type thing. And then, you know, so you notice that I walked into the room, it feels really, really intense in here. You know, you might even say it feels really like the air is really dense, things like that. And then, but what does that mean psychically? Well, part of being a psychic, like I said, is like being a very good detective. So you're going to understand and analyze these answers and results on a conscious level as your middle self. So, you know, you might be like, okay, well, why is that? And like try and put that together with your rational mind. And if you're still unsure, then you can ask another question and try to narrow it down, like I was saying before. So when we become aware of the beliefs that are limiting our psychic and higher consciousness through our research, we shall then instruct our subconscious mind to remove the faulty beliefs and replace with quote unquote positive ones. This can be achieved with repeating healing and disruptive colonial statements daily and continuing to unpack our biases. And when I say positive, what I actually mean is unbiased and accurate, just in case anybody's confused. But like I said, you'll have access to this stuff. So, you know, we can reframe these colonial thought patterns, you know, and I want to be clear though, you cannot just affirm our way out of colonialist harm. We must also do our anti-racism, etc. work too. This is just in component to working with an anti-racism educator or a coach, you know, taking a class, reading that book. Please don't just do the book reading, like read the book and take a class, you know, work with a coach, like all of that stuff. So these affirmations are in conjunction with, my friends. So you can say things to yourself like, it is safe and wise to trust my inner knowing. My intuition has been right many times before. Psychic abilities are my birthright. The primary function of my intuition is to keep me safe. Others may, quote, think it's crazy, but I don't have to own that ableist thinking. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Okay. I am supernatural and my intuition is supernatural. All right. You also want to be careful of spiritual bypassing. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. So I want us to banish it if we can, please. Spiritual bypassing is an abusive defense mechanism to avoid uncomfortable feelings or confrontation of shadow, using unhealthy, manipulative, and often inaccurate spiritual platitudes. Things like toxic positivity, what I refer to as enlightenment or light washing, and the shadow side, quote unquote, of love and light culture, right? So what does spiritual bypassing sound like? Your trauma made you the strong person you are today. You should be grateful for your trauma. No. I am a strong person because I am a strong person. You know, I would have been that strong person with or without the traumatic experiences that I did not need to have in my life, nor did I deserve them. Yeah. These are the types of things you can counter that nonsense with. The other one that I hear a lot is anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Or anger is a very healthy and valid response to the oppression that I'm experiencing right now. You know, things like that. Oh God, raise your vibration and you won't attract this anymore. Like, no, that is not the way systemic oppression works, y'all. So, you know, you know what I mean. You've seen it. Yeah, spiritual bypassing is very closely linked to gaslighting. It is a way that we gaslight people, for sure. So, to counter these things, you know, I have it divided for white folks, and then I have it divided for, you know, Black, Indigenous people of color, For white folks, it's more of like a to-do list. For Black folks, it's like, if someone says, and this is, and the image credit is to this person right here that I cannot pronounce their name, but it's an Instagram handle. So it's affirmations for us. And if someone says, you know, you are responsible for your reality, you can counter that with, I am not responsible for my experience with racism. Thanks. You know, things like that. What you experienced is here to teach you. That was not a lesson I deserved to learn. You know, things like that. Let's see here. Oh, Nick, I want to remember that question for when we're at the end, Jenna. Oh, we are at the end? Okay. One thing that I get all the time is, well, you just hate white people and you want to be angry and negative all the time. My feelings are valid, warranted, and being critical of oppression is resistance. Thanks. So what you're going to do when you get your PDF is you're going to look at how does your privilege cause harm to others and yourself, and go, you know, energy center point in your body by you know, each one, all 7 of them. For reference, these are the things that each chakra you know, governs or affects. You know, like, how has your privilege harmed your heart chakra? How has it harmed your truth? Things like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then how has the oppressed aspects of yourself, like, how has oppression harmed your psychic self? That list is probably going to be very long. You know, how has the world harmed your psychic self because you have oppressed identities? So you're going to use the framework on yourself. This is a meditation exercise. Because we're running out of time, I'm not going to go into it in depth here, but this is how you do work with neuroplasticity. It is retraining your brain, and doing so 10 minutes a day for 6 weeks can rewire your brain. Yes, you can, Heidi. I teach quite often. So there are instructions on how to do this. Oh yeah, this is an affirmation I say to myself a lot. As a child, I saw the truth and the adults gaslighted me. It wasn't really their fault. They didn't really understand what was going on. But anyways, as an adult, I now honor my truth and the intuition of others. Yeah. So, yep, more instructions on how to do that. Okay, we're at the end. My goodness. Okay, yeah, we're at time. But yeah, Casey, I don't know if I have time for questions or anything like that. I just want to, yeah?
Oh, I was just going to say, I really wish we had more time.
Yeah.
But just Zoom logistics, we have like another class on this channel.
Yeah, absolutely.
But people want to continue to work with you, so how can they do that?
You can find me on Instagram. You can find me at revolutionarymystic.com. Like I said, you could join my Facebook group. It's also called Revolutionary Mystics. You can listen to my podcast. It's called Revolutionary Mystic. But, you know, I highly, you know, recommend you seek me out. Let's connect. I teach classes all the time. I'm often in community. And of course, check out my awesome shop too. You guys all have a really cool coupon that no one else has. Get some good use out of that. And thank you for being here with me. Y'all are so rad. Just want to say, you know, happy Halloween, happy full moon. And Casey, they want to know what the coupon is again.
It is Magic Capital 2020. Let me throw that in the chat. This was amazing. Thank you so much. So much information. Really excited to share this slideshow with everyone, and I can't wait to dig in even deeper.
Awesome. That was so much fun. You guys are awesome. So thank you so much for joining me. And, thank you, Modern Witches Confluence. This was my first one, by the way. What a way to enter this community. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I hope to see you all out there in the virtual and hopefully real world someday. Would be nice.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Be well, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.